Good morning, I'm Steve Cushman, and welcome to our first radio cabinet restoration class here at Radio Central. We've got a great group of people here, all waiting to hear from our restoration expert, Jim Bradt, who is going to give you all the tips you will ever need to start working on radio cabinets. So without further ado, Jim Bradt.
Yay! Steve forgot to mention that I'm not the only instructor here. Cliff Farwell. Is that how you pronounce it? He's got equal responsibility for this, though. There's a lot of faces I don't recognize. Are you members or new members? Or?
I've been a member.
I think I've seen you at swap meets. But I wanted the names because I don't want to say, hey, you. You were the guy, the old man with the blue hat, you know. Anybody will answer. This isn't really that well organized. Cliff and I were going to try to organize better, but I came down with a medical problem, and we never got together this week, so I don't know where this is going to go. We may go all over the place. And if we do, just stop me, interrupt me for questions. Anytime, just interrupt. I'm going to hand these out first. We're going to just do a simple cleaning, minor scratch repair and waxing. And I'm hopefully I can show you some of these radios that don't look so great. It can be cleaned up real simple in an afternoon. A stripping and refinishing. Be prepared to spend. I spend on a console like that Zenith they just brought in. I'll spend 100 hours. And cost. A console will easily cost $100 in material. Be prepared if you're going to strip, refinish, and like Cliff's radio here. Be prepared for 50 bucks. 50 hours. It's kind of not for everybody. But what we're going to talk about today is for everybody. It's just simple cleaning, and Cliff's going to hand it out. Oh, that was another handout.
Oh, okay. That's good. All right.
Here's some more. I think I brought half my garage. I'm not too sure where to start. Got to warn you though, I've got thin skin. If you make fun of me or embarrass me, I'm going to go home.
Is that a threat or a promise?
Sleeping is permitted.
All right.
Then why did you come if you're going to sleep?
Well,
That's the thing.
Denny told me.
We actually have an ulterior motive. We're trying to train a bunch of disciples of Jim and Cliff to help us with the massive restoration of 1,000 pieces back there.
I think where we'll start is the first thing you got to do is evaluate the radio and get an idea of what you think you're going to do with it. And you probably already did this when you bought the radio or acquired it. You probably bought it with the idea, I'm going to strip this, or I'm just going to clean it up. But we got quite a few examples here of some problems. Now there is such a thing as a valuable antique or a very expensive radio, highly big value. Think twice about even touching those. If we have some in the club, we got an Atwater Kent Radiodyne, you don't restore those kind of radios.
Why?
Because they're only going to be original ones. And the radios like that Radiodyne are so nice, you can't really improve on it. There's three kind of classifications of conservation, preservation, and restoration. And in my mind, conservation is like the Declaration of Independence. That's in a glass vault. It's lowered up and down each morning. It's never been touched by human hands since 1776. Preservation is more like the Star Spangled Banner, the flag. they've done restoration, not restoration, but preservation on that by sewing up holes so they won't tear anymore. You use original material. Another great example of a preservation is the Sistine Chapel ceiling. When Da Vinci painted it, he didn't paint it with a bunch of
Michelangelo painted it.
Okay, see, that's why.
That's why you need me in it.
But anyway, he didn't paint it with dirt on it. So that's not the way he wanted us to look at it. So they cleaned it up, but they didn't alter the painting of it. Restoration is more like an antique car. Every nut and bolt gets done. This is a good example of a restoration. It's been stripped. Now in restoration, you really got the freedom to use anything you want. You can use poly finishes on it. I prefer to use the original stuff only because this is a hobby. I'm not doing it for living or have to do it. So to me, it's more fun to just do it the way the original guys did it. But God, some of these radios I haven't seen yet. And some of them I picked out because I thought there were some things here that we could demonstrate. Here's one right here. We talked to Denny about this, but don't put masking tape on the original finish. No matter if it's this stuff they sell as delicate tape or for delicate finishes, it's not. It'll lift the original finish right off. Same way when you're toning it. Say you wanted to mask this off and tone this bottom a darker color. Be very careful about putting tape on there. I seal everything with shellac before I put any tape on it. Because the worst thing you can do is be about half done with your restoration. Put tape on there, pull it off, and out comes your finish with it. So, no tape.
What do you suggest instead?
Sealing it first with shellac, lacquer, even poly if that's what you're using. There's no one way to do this stuff. You'll see that Cliff and I do things differently. I'm not doing the radios like I did last year anymore. I'm constantly changing my ways. The best way to do it is the way that you're comfortable with. But
Jim, would you say the easiest would be to use like a wipe-on poly, because assuming that people aren't really equipped for spraying?
well, like I said, I'm in it for the hobby, so I want to do it the old way. But if these new finishes were available back in 1930, that's what they would have been using. They wouldn't have been using shellac. In 1923, when DuPont patented lacquer, all of a sudden shellac was no more, except on very fine furniture. They went 100% to lacquer. Furniture, cars, everything. So like I say, if these polys, catalyzed lacquer and stuff were available back in the 30s, that's what they would have used. But I can tell the difference. I can tell the difference between lacquer, poly, shellac, oil. Little history, before 1923, the common way to treat wood was either oil it with any kind of oil. I've even used Castro 10W30. And it looks great. We're not going to do any refinishing today or talk about it, but when we do get to that subject, I'll bring in this example of 10W30. It's great. Another thing they used was wax. Wax wood. It didn't last. They'd have to continually wax it. And then the other thing that was kind of a European thing was shellac. But it was very labor intensive. And then, like I said, in 1923, DuPont came out with lacquer. And all of a sudden, you could paint things in a spray booth. They'd dry, put them on the production line, out the door.
Jim, can you tell us how you go through a process of determining what finish is on the piece?
That's a good point to bring up. You can pretty much tell by when it was made. If it was made before 1927, 26, chances are it's shellac. Anything after that is lacquer. If it's Well, I shouldn't say that. This is a good example of crazing. I've never seen crazing in shellac, so I'm pretty sure this is lacquer. But the way to tell lacquer and shellac is to let's use this one as an example and see if I was right. First, use alcohol. Shellac is soluble in alcohol. That's the.
Say it again.
Shellac is soluble in alcohol. It is also hydroscopic, means it can pick up water out of the air. It also has a shelf life. 6 months is about maximum for shellac. I don't know. That kind of suspicion being shellac.
Can you turn it around and show us what it
Yeah, I'm going to put some lacquer next to it and see if we can see a difference. No, this is lacquer thinner. Yeah, she's definitely coming off as a lacquer thinner, but I would suspect that shellac and lacquer are soluble in lacquer thinner. But does anybody know what year this was? This is a Radiola
16.
16? Okay, this could be a transition period where they were still using lacquer. And I'm really suspecting shellac.
Because alcohol wouldn't touch the lacquer at all.
No.
Right?
And this doesn't look like dirt. This does look like finish.
Normally you go through a simple cleaning to take off any dirt, so you're not going to be confused.
That's the first step we'll do. But while we're on the subject of determining what finish is on it, there's also a test for determining what.
Can we see what what it looked like in the two areas?
It's not really definitive.
Toner red.
Yeah. I kind of think it's shellac. I'm wrong on that. But on the same subject, how do you determine what kind of a material this is versus this? This is bakelite and this is plastic, which is a very generic term for thermoplastic materials. But you take a hot soldering iron in an area that won't show, and if it's bakelite, it won't melt. You can hardly even put a dent in it with a hot soldering iron. If you scratch it with sandpaper and smell it, there's a distinct odor to it. This, you put a hot iron to it. Well, I think I'm wrong again. I think this is bakelite. I'm judging by marks here, but if it's plastic, the soldering iron will melt into it real easily. Okay, so let's go on to cleaning then. I'm going to take this radio, I think, first. The way I clean radios, and Cliff, interrupt me now if you've got different opinions, but on a small radio, something that doesn't take a lot of cleaning, I like Gojo.
What's that?
Gojo. Be sure to buy the stuff that doesn't have the pumice in it, or you'll scratch the finish on the original finish. But I get this at Ace Hardware, no problem. And then on a console or some big job, or if I got a lot of radios to do at one time, I like to use Murphy's. And Murphy's is made specifically for wood. It's just a simple soap. Stay away from using anything like this. 409, Simple Green, almost anything you can buy in the supermarket. These contain real strong chemicals, ammonia, caustics, and I have seen some.
Can you show the label on this long one there? Murphy.
It's in the write-up. Now to nothing fancy. I just spray her down. I also have a spritz bottle of water.
Jim, will this take off nicotine?
Yes, but I'm not sure how good. Soap is designed to let me back up again. There are basically two kinds of dirt, organic and inorganic. Organic is nicotine, oils, kitchen oils, waxes would be an organic. Inorganic is dust, earth, dirt. And soap is more designed to take care of the inorganic, although there are surfactants in it that will also clean off organics, but not to a great extent.
Jim, why are you adding the water along with the Murphy's oil?
It's pretty strong.
So it won't be as strong with the water?
Yeah, it'll
Kind of diluting.
yeah, the water is more like a carrier.
You can buy the Murphy's in a concentrate, which is economical, and then you can mix.
Yeah, I buy a big
whatever
bottle,
solution you want and just
big
add
bottle
it
of
to
it and
the
keep
table.
filling my spritzer here. But this, you can see how thick that is.
Yeah.
Then a good test to see if you're done or not is to wipe it down. Look at your rag. Another thing on this, be conservative on how much water you use on a radio. Most of these radios are put together with light glue. You get them too wet, they're going to fall apart on you. If you need to take something apart on a radio of this age, that's how you get it apart, is hot water. You can see even after I wash it, now for some reason the front of this seems to be dirtier. I normally, if it's a radio that I'm not going to strip, I'm going to try to save the original finish. The next thing I do is use naphtha or mineral spirits and go over it again. This will really take off the nicotine and should take off the waxes, where the detergent, it's not going to take off waxes very well. I like naphtha because it's a quicker dryer. It doesn't seem to be as oily. I like the smell better. And that's probably why I got the medical problem, is I keep smelling all this stuff. The big problem with
mineral spirits too.
Yeah, I've got mineral spirits here. It's going to accomplish the same thing, but it's just that I like naphtha. The big problem with naphtha is it's outlawed in California now, so I get mine when I cross the border into Nevada.
So the mineral spirits just cleans it up without taking the finish off?
Yeah, mineral spirits won't attack lacquer or shellac.
They don't take finish called wax, right? But not the underlying.
Yeah, what you want to do is get it clean, and if it's clean, it's going to be quite dull looking. But that's what you want, is a dull finish. Okay, now this ain't looking too bad. Pass it around. You see where the finish is missing here, finish missing here. It's you definitely wouldn't want to take this home and put it on your shelf where your wife is going to look at it. You're going to get another hobby if you try something like that. So pass it around.
Jim, do you want to maybe put some Gojo on part of that?
I'm going to do this.
Oh, that one, okay. Just so they can see the difference.
This radio is a club radio, but I'm really curious because, God, you should see the muck that came out of the sponge. I don't think you can see it unless I pass it around. I ain't going to do that, but it definitely was dirty. But this is a club radio that I'm real curious about. As far as I can tell, just glancing at it, it's original finish and it's in perfect shape. So whoever donated this to the club didn't donate the chassis, but it's a common radio, so should be able to find a chassis for it. But you don't see them in this condition very often.
Typical cathedral radio cabinet, right?
Yeah, it's a Philco.
Philco, okay.
So I'm going to use Gojo on this one now. I use steel wool normally with Gojo.
I'm fine.
Well, I was going to try to explain it. If it's a real bad radio like, well, definitely the cathedral down there or this one here, I would probably use something like 00 steel wool. But on something like this, I don't want to scratch it any more than I have to. And so I would go with 4/0, 4/0. This is supposed to be the equivalent, but it's much, much finer than what you would buy 4/0 in this brand.
Hold that up the box.
I'm going to pass this around. This is really expensive. You don't want to just use it willy-nilly. But this is what you would use if you get to the point where you're using pumice, rotten stone, or polishing a radio. You would use this kind of steel wool.
So, where do you get this steel wool? What can you
I buy that at Rockler or Macbeth's over there in Berkeley. But hardware stores don't sell it. You got to go to a woodworking hobby store.
But you can get the quadruple lot anywhere. So that's
That brand there, any hardware store, Home Depot, anything, sell that brand.
Yeah, this comes anywhere.
A lot of this stuff is cheap. This is about $13 a pair. That stuff is around $5.
Hold that
Get
up.
about $5 for this.
And that's triple.
No quadruple. Well, when you put it right up against this other stuff, it's pretty obvious that this is coarser than what he's using there. So he's got a very nice piece. He's being conservative and using that. You could also just not use steel wool at all.
Yeah, you can use a rag. I like steel wool. If it's just fine, it isn't going to scratch the surface because this is what you use to polish a radio. And it kind of works into the surface better. Normally I would probably spitz this with water, wipe it off with a paper towel first, just to get rid of this dust, but it's not necessary.
The Gojo is hand soap.
Yeah, this is waterless hand cleaner.
Don't need gloves.
Yeah, you don't need gloves. There's no odor. Well, there's an odor to it, but it's definitely not objectionable. You should have it in the garage anyway because I use it for cleaning my hands, and it ain't that expensive. I think a can like this is around maybe $4.
So Jim, I had a hard time finding it because they all want to sell the orange stuff with the pumice in it.
Well, I've always found it at Ace Hardware, but
That's where I found mine ultimately when you told me. When you go to
I don't
the
know
big
about
box
Home Depot
stores,
or.
they sell you the pumice stuff.
Another nice thing about Gojo is it doesn't dry very fast. You got a long time to play with it.
Do you need to rinse it off?
Yes. It's not necessary, but on a radio, you're going to have all these little crevices and cracks where you're not going to be able to wipe it out. So I rinse it out.
It leaves behind kind of a lanolin
Yeah, I think there's lanolin.
that will eventually dry out over time, but for a while it kind of gives it a gloss. It's good. So if you wanted to sell the radio that day, it'd be a good thing to do.
I can't imagine why you would want to leave anything on a radio between steps, you know, getting to the final, putting the finish on. Because when you put a finish on, you're sealing. So you don't want dirt. I don't want no gojo. I don't even want naphtha unless it's completely dry. And boy, one of the biggest problems I have is no patience. You need patience. And I rush things too much. And I'm working on a project right now that I just destroyed by rushing another finish over another finish. Now I got to start all over.
So you use that for smaller cabinets because it takes longer?
Use it all, any size, but it's easier on a small cabinet. I do this on my workbench. Where the Murphys, I normally go outside. It's a little messier. My suspicions are right on this radio finally. This really has a nice finish on it. You can see some of the stuff that came off. I've done some cabinets, some consoles, where when I did the cleaning, I took a picture of my pile of rags when I'm done. And it's unbelievable, the stuff that come off these radios. In fact, in the 30s and 40s, well, even into the 60s, everybody smoked. The house was full of nicotine up. Your grandmother probably mentioned spring cleaning. They used to actually wash the wallpaper in the house, in the ceilings, to get the nicotine, the cooking oils, and everything off. And as a little kid, I can remember using that wallpaper cleaner to clean wallpaper. It became Play-Doh.
If you're concerned about water damage, this would be a safer way to go.
Yeah, now I'm still going to use water on it because of the crevices, like Elmo said, but you just don't have to flood it. When you get water on Gojo, it kind of turns white, so you can see it running off and you know when's enough. I buy these things at Costco in a big pack, about half the price of Ace Hardware. And it's nothing to go through 2 rolls on a console.
Is that a softer paper towel than a standard, or is it?
Seems like it's more absorbent. And it holds together a lot better. I don't know, my wife buys Costco paper towels, but they are the cheapest things. That and their damn toilet paper. You know, keep wiping your butt with your finger.
On video.
Edit point, edit point.
TMI.
I find that using the white paper towel will let you see the color you're removing better. So if you really want to know a little more, you might use some of that at least in one spot.
Anybody looking at this have a different opinion of whether it's original or not, let me know, but you can see right in here, this has been toned. This looks untouched, but this dark area has been toned with toned lacquer. And you can see where some of the finish is missing. So I would definitely say that this is original, but boy, is that in nice shape. We're not done with it yet.
Jim, do you have any problem with taking like a toothbrush or to get to the nooks and crannies?
So well, let me talk about tools next. Toothbrush is mandatory. You got to have toothbrush. And I got a stiffer brush for when you're stripping, you need something stiffer. Dremel tool. I couldn't do a radio without a Dremel tool.
What do you have on it?
This has got a wire brush, but I use sanding discs. I use a lot of stuff. But if you're going to use one of these wire brushes, they're probably from China or some foreign country. Be sure to wear safety glasses, because these little wires will come flying off.
Especially the brass. It seems to break right off.
Impossible to do a radio without an X-Acto knife. Trimming, masking tape. I'm going to use it over here on this plastic radio. What the hell is the question?
Toothbrushes, are they okay?
Oh, toothbrushes, yeah. While we're on tools, Q-tips. I go through tons of these. My eyesight's bad. You'll see Scott Robinson always wears one of these when he's working on a radio. I don't use it that much on a cabinet unless I'm doing a veneer repair or something like that, but it sure comes in handy when you need it. And this is a Harbor Freight ultrasonic cleaner. I think they're $19. You can't get a radio cabinet in there, but they're great for cleaning up knobs. Rather than taking a toothbrush and cleaning the knob with Gojo, just throw the whole bunch in here with nuts and bolts and everything, turn it on. Now I just use soap in there, soap and water. But when I was working for the government, we used trisodium phosphate, which you can get at the hardware. This radio was picked up by Richard Watts because he saw this deposit on top of the radio and thought it would come off easily. So I'm going to try it. Okay, it's going to come off, but it's not going to come off as easy as we thought. But it's going to completely come off.
Is it a wax?
I have no idea what it is. No idea. You don't want to sand it off because this is a Bakelite radio. And like I say in the write-up, Bakelite was injected into a mold that was very highly polished. And under pressure, the resins came to the surface and formed this glossy finish. But in order to give it strength, they put all kinds of floor sweepings and everything else in it. And if you go past this glossiness, which is very, very thin, there's nothing you can do to polish it again. If you do, either paint it metallic purple or I use a clear lacquer, give it a shiny finish, but God, anybody that knows Bakelite radios will see it in a second.
What, black shoe polish bring it up?
Black shoe polish is just like any polish. Yeah, it's a petroleum material that back in the 50s and 60s when we polished our shoes, you did it all the time because it wouldn't last. As soon as you went out in any kind of wet weather, you come home and polish shoes again.
It's kind of like pigmented wax.
Yeah. I'm not going to, we've got too much, we're doing pretty good to do, so I'm not going to bother chipping this all off. But this is a Bakelite radio. Treat it just like you would a wood radio.
But Jim, wouldn't you try to dissolve it first, scratch it?
It's a good idea. Since this is Bakelite, we can't hurt it. Let's try it.
See if somebody gives.
One of the nicest solvents around. I used this by the drum load when I was working in a research lab, and this is nice stuff. And I don't think it's that dangerous. I don't know. Some of you know that last Monday I was diagnosed with pneumonia. And it's probably from breathing all this crap.
Pull the can up to the camera.
But I've never been afraid of this. I used to use benzene to wash my glassware, carbon tetrachloride, but I've never been afraid of acetone.
Do you?
It's not doing anything to the deposit. They're sure taking a lot of stuff off. I'm not sure if that's Bakelite or not, so I'm going to stop. So I don't think it's soluble, but it definitely chips off easy. It'd be nothing to just sit in a chair and pick this off. And I doubt if it'd take more than one beer. Speaking of tools, when you get into veneer repair and everything, this is the handiest little thing to have. I don't know where I got this, probably some toy store.
What's that?
It's a little hand plane, but it comes in handy on the, like I said, I'm going to jump all over the place. And Cliff, jump in.
You're doing good.
I'm going to treat this just like a regular wood radio. This has got a dial scale that's been riveted in, so I didn't want to bother undoing it. Oh boy, it's dirty. Now when that dries, it dries kind of dull. But with the Gojo, like Denny said, when you put the Gojo on, it's nice and shiny. So I still got hope on this one.
And before you did that, Jim, you were careful to note whether the dial markings were on the outside or the inside.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like in the write-up, a lot, well, not a lot, but some of these radio dials are water-soluble inks. And you can destroy a beautiful radio by dissolving the numbers off of your dial.
Been there.
Yeah, I think if you've been across too many radios, you've done it. Let's see, we did this one. Is there any question about cleaning? I think we pretty much covered it.
What about just ordinary dish washing soap? That's safe, right? Like an Ivory or a Dawn?
Ivory or Dawn would be a soap, yeah, but...
It just depends on the glues back then too. You just
Yeah.
you gotta be
Well,
careful.
hide glue is quite soluble.
Yeah.
I stay away from any household product or any kind of gimmick. We're not to that part yet, but here's a gimmick material. Steve got me started on this. It's supposed to be a single cleaner, reconditioner, wonder stuff. What it's made out of is turpentine, 1/3 turpentine, 1/3 ammonia, 1/3 vinegar, and 1/3 linseed oil, I believe it is. But I know the turpentine and the vinegar are 2/3 of it. It don't do a crap. Stay away from any kind of gimmick, any kind of household cleaner. Household cleaners have got something in them so they, like an oven cleaner, that's pure caustic. Your polishes, your household polishes, are nothing more than a petroleum distillate, some kind of solvent. And as soon as it evaporates, it's dull again. There's very little wax in a cleaner. But the big problem is a lot of cleaners contain silicones. And if you get silicone on a radio, you'll never, well, eventually you could fight it, but you'll get fish eyes. You'll have the hell of a time refinishing that radio.
It's a one-way growth.
Yeah.
So if you put it on, that's all you're ever going to put on it.
Take your rags when you're done and burn them. I'm being facetious, but I got a garbage can right where I work, and it goes directly in there. They don't come in the garage. I never do anything like that in the garage. I don't know the last time I used a silicone product. Automotive waxes, that's the easy ones, got silicones in them. And I used to restore old cars. God almighty. You couldn't get rid of the silicone in the paint. And how many times I painted a car and it all fish-eyed, sand it down.
What's fish on?
Little specks that, where the finish did go over it, kind of. Oh God.
Nothing sticks to silicone. So if there's a little molecule there, then the finish at that point doesn't stick, and it leaves like an aura around it.
It's almost like the similar poles on a magnet. You know, put two north poles together. It's almost like that. It just repels the finish, and you can't do anything about it. You can sand it. You got to get that little molecule of silica out of there, or she'll just continually fish on it. Except for one trick. If you got a problem finish like that, you'll probably be able to get away with sealing it with shellac. You can put shellac over anything. Shellac's compatible with anything. There's a lot of falsehoods about shellac that aren't true. One is that it can't take any moisture. Holy crap, I wet sand shellac all the time. That's part of it. It won't hold up to any kind of wear. Now, obviously, some of these radios are 80, 90 years old. They've held that. Shellac's a nice material. The solvent is alcohol, same as Jim B. You can do it in the house. You don't have to clean your brush when you're done or anything. You just take your brush and you put some tin foil around it. Next day, it's probably ready to go. If it does dry out.
Are you going to show us how to use it next time?
We're going to talk about what you want to do next time, but finishing, Cliff and I have talked about this, finishing and stripping can take a whole week. That's a big subject. So we're not going to get into it today.
Yeah, but next time?
The purpose of today was to kind of get started on this workshop and see if there was any interest in even doing it and where you wanted to go with it. And we'll talk about that before we break up for lunch. But this totally depends on you. Cliff and I are willing to do everything but take your radios home and work on them for you.
That's a good idea, actually.
Well, only people like Anthony's got that kind of power.
Question, carnauba wax that is made from insects would be safe as a finish?
Carnauba wax is probably the only real wax for wood. It's too hard a wax by itself. So what they do is they add beeswax to it to make it softer. And then they put solvents in it to make it even softer. But the carnauba wax itself is an extremely hard material. And this is how they treated wood before lacquer, before shellac. They take wax and just wax it.
Just be careful when you buy it in the store because it might not be straight carnauba. They put a lot of silicone today in all the wax.
Most everybody here is old enough to remember waxing a car with Simonized wax. God, talk about work. But again, let's go back to the very beginning and evaluating radios. I don't see anything here other than the tombstone that I'd take home and put on my radio shelves. And I think you knew this when you bought the radio, that it's not perfect. And if it was perfect, chances are you wouldn't have shown up today. This obviously just needs to be dusted and put on the shelf.
But it has to be, I have to replace the veneer. I know that.
This is a project. It can be done. Well, another point I wanted to make is there's hardly anything we're talking about, and even in the future, that can't be reversed. So don't get afraid to take a chance. Like I said, whatever works for you is the best way to do it. But anything can be reversed. All this stuff we're doing today, if you don't like the finish, wipe it off with mineral spirits.
Well, it's harder if you put down a varnish, right?
If you put down polyurethane or whatever varnish is, if you got to go back and restrip it, or oil. John's got a television that he oiled, I don't know how many years ago, but what did you think it was, tung oil?
Well, I think it was tung oil or linseed.
Yeah.
And the sun hit it
and polymerized the hell out of it. I think the definition of a polymer is something like only around 20 carbons. It's not all that long. John's television's in the thousands. You can't touch that with a jackhammer. We tried everything on it. But again, I lost my place.
How about Old English?
Well, I don't like Old English. Old English seems to have a shelf life. It gets, when it's old, it doesn't seem to work. I just don't, I've tried it, don't like it. Scott Robinson, a lot of people here like Old English. I swear by Howard's. Old English is a furniture polish. That's the only product they make. Howard's has a ton of products. That's their business. This is a good example of a problem you're going to run into in the 20s radios, or even the 30s. It's called crazing.
With the little cracks?
Yeah. Or in a different form, not too different than this, is alligating. Alligate.
Crocodile.
Edit that out. Chances are you want to strip this back. And this is a beautiful veneer. So, boy, if you strip this and refinish it, this is beautiful. But if it's a radio you want to keep the original finish for some reason, you can try remalgamating it. Which is essentially what I did here. Trying to dissolve the original finish and getting it to flow out again. It's very tricky. It works sometimes, and a lot of times it doesn't work and you ruin the finish. But if you're going to strip it, so what? Play with it. But here's a product that Mohawk sells. Mohawk is by far the best company to get your refinishing supplies. This is a big company. Hard to find locally. I get mine off the internet. But they got this product called Amalgamator. And the object of this is you put it on and rub it into the surface, and eventually it's going to dissolve that surface and flow it.
Kind of a weak solvent, Jim?
Not sure, because it definitely works different than just a plain lacquer thinner. It's probably a lacquer thinner with a retarder in it, but there's something else in it. Now, as I'm rubbing that, I can feel it getting sticky. That means I'm getting the finish dissolving. If this was shellac, it's a lot easier to remalgamate. Shellac remalgamates pretty easy. I don't see it alligating or crazing on shellac as much as I see flaking. This material doesn't seem to remove the finish like a straight lacquer thinner would. But
You try to reamalgamate, do you tend to swirl to try to work it in?
you get into this, you got to experiment. There's no way, and I don't think the directions here shake well. This only works once in a great while, but when it works, it saves a ton of work, and it saves an original finish.
Jim, how do you handle a finish that's been covered with another finish? How do you approach that?
Well, if it's lacquer on the top of shellac, you want to stick with lacquer. Now you can put shellac back over it. I do that all the time. But you don't want to put another finish on top of it. Even though you can put enamel over the top of lacquer, it's not really compatible. Now you can't go the other way around. You can't go put lacquer on top of enamel. It'll lift it. But you're not going to run into enamel on these radios.
I remember what I ran into with some kind of varnish over an oil that someone had done. And it was really hard to just remove the varnish and leave behind the original oil.
If you try to selectively remove a finish, you got to get off. This didn't work.
It didn't do it.
No. But then, like I said earlier, this is a beautiful radio if it's completely stripped and refinished. And it's not a valuable radio. It's pretty common. You're not going to rob history of something by refinishing this.
I have a question. And this may be not apropos, but what about a painted finish? I get that many times, and you haven't said a bit about how to clean it.
Painted finishes,
What you should do.
don't run into those quite very often. I believe Larry's radio here is paint. And I made a big mistake when I did a couple of Art Deco radios last summer, where I mentioned that I painted it black. Bad terminology. This is black, ebony toner.
My question is, a painted grain finish like you might see on a console.
That's something that someone applied later, but originally?
Original.
Yeah, like automotive grain on
Yes.
the dashboard or something like that. Oh boy. Very little you can do to restore it. You can clean it. I just did a Midwest radio this summer that used wood grain painted on the front. And I airbrushed it. And it took me about 3 weeks. I bought me a big panel of metal down at the hardware store. It took me about 3 weeks of going out there every day and playing with it until I could get that technique down. And I painted this one panel, and I haven't painted anything since. But anyway, black lacquer paint is nothing but lacquer with black, normally black in it. Toner is nothing but clear lacquer with earth toners in it. So I made a big mistake in calling this black paint. It should be ebony, which is a European term for black, toner. Then I wouldn't have got questioned. But the so-called expert said that that's not black paint, that's brown, dark brown.
I think, it's just based on what the carrier is. You can have any color and with the carrier, and when the carrier's gone, you've left the pigment behind. So you can call it
That's a good
toner or ebony or whatever, or paint, but all you're leaving behind is the pigment, and the carrier disappears, whether it's water
carrier.
or oil base. So that's what you got.
A good toner is, by the way, is that Mohawk Toner, right?
Either that or, how do you pronounce it, vellum?
And it's a spray. It's just you spray the toner on, and
Here,
Jim has it over there. It's Mohawk.
this is $7 or $8 a can, and I might have 30 to 40 cans in my garage. Big investment in these. And you go through it real quick.
Ebony and dark brown.
I hate stain. I cannot get stain to work right. And stain is intended for new wood when you get to that part. But it's not intended to go over old finishes.
Right. Well, what I encounter a lot is there is stain used by the manufacturer because it's a good way to even out the wood that otherwise wouldn't look pretty. So they hide some of their defects and poor matching with stain. So you'll encounter stain if you try to strip all the way down. And that's one of the reasons why stripping is so difficult, is you have to get off all the old stain. But for a restorer, I don't know, maybe you use it for touch-up, Jim? Have you tried that?
I'm going to demonstrate that, I think, next. I'll bring it back. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm going to demonstrate that, I think, next.
Maybe Howard's is a little bit of that, too, the way it operates.
Howard's is, they won't tell you what it is. You can't find out what any of this stuff is, and the terminology has changed over the years. I mentioned real briefly earlier that I have no idea what varnish is. That's a generic term for finish. There is such a thing as spar varnish, which is a unique material, but that's the only thing that I've ever been able to find. But I've been all over the internet. I can't find any good definition for varnish. Even some people refer to shellac as a varnish. It's just a generic term meaning finish.
He's got a definition in his book that he
He
tries
does?
to.
What is the definition?
A varnish is any finish which, as it dries, it cross-links and it locks mechanically. And therefore, when you attack it with the solvent that originally carried it, it will not dissolve. So he defines that as a
I've
varnish.
also seen a definition where it's any kind of a resinous material dissolved in a solvent.
You know, shellacs used to originally be made from the wings of ladybugs.
Well, shellac today is made from bug shit. It's the droppings of the lac bug. I think it's in Indonesia or something where this lac bug is.
Right.
And they go and they take these bushes and scrape all the bug shit off, and then dissolve it and lay it out on a cement pad or something like this. Big panels, and then when it's all dry, they chop it up in the flakes. But that's why there's different colors of shellac. Black shellac is as it hasn't been filtered, hasn't got the leaves and the twigs and everything taken out of it. In fact, you got to filter it. Blonde shellac is highly treated, all the impurities out of it. Shellac also naturally has wax in it, so that's why you can put shellac over top of wax with no problem. Naturally, it has wax in it. But normally, the shellac you buy is de-waxed, and I don't know if there's any difference one way or the other.
By the way, the reason why he defines it this way is when you use it, if you use a varnish and you put on, the way he defines it, if you put on another coating, then it will not dissolve itself into the previous layer. But if you use a shellac, or if you use an oil, I'm not sure about a lacquer.
No, lacquers will dissolve the under finish and it becomes one.
Right, so it also works with that. So all those finishes you can put on lots of thin layers and they interlock.
Well, like
because they partially
I've seen
dissolve.
on the internet when people have referred to shellac as a varnish.
Yeah, I think it depends on the year, maybe too, what varnish means, but he tries to define it as the thing that won't dissolve the previous layer you put down. And it could be polyurethane, it could be a natural product.
If you want
anyway,
to be
one definition.
Computational, go into some place like Rockler or Macbeth and ask them what a varnish is. They won't give you an answer. Also, what is a lacquer? In 1923, when DuPont came out with lacquer, it was nitrocellulose lacquer, made from cotton. Today, lacquer is acrylic. It's a polymer. And if you see a lacquer labeled pre-catalyzed or catalyzed lacquer, chances are it's acrylic. But I was just in Macbeth the other day, and I asked him, what's acrylic lacquer? No idea. But I'm pretty sure acrylic lacquer, catalyzed lacquer is acrylic lacquer. It's a plastic. It's not lacquer like we think of lacquer.
Some lacquers have more polymers in it for plastic or plastics.
Yeah, especially oils.
Yeah.
Your tongue oil, your linseed oil, they're not pure oil.
And you'll discover some are better than others.
Now we got to this part. Now I want to clean it up because this is just about ready to be put on the shelf. I would never restore this just to get rid of this slight flaking here. I could use my airbrush, mask this off, use my airbrush and clean this up. But I'm not even sure if I'd bother with it because this is original finish and that's awful minor. But the problem now comes up, what to do next. Got a couple of choices. One thing that people use is stain. The theory is that the stain will only adhere to unfinished wood. So it'll take a scratch and color the wood in the scratch, but it won't do anything to the finish. But it is a stain. You're definitely going to color the wood some. But on a I think I'll use a stain on this radio because there's really no scratches in this radio.
You want to talk about the Howard's Feed and Wax?
Not yet.
Is it? Okay.
I do an awful lot of radios, especially for the club with Howard's. I'm going to put it on and take it back off just to show you.
What is it that you have?
Howard's comes in different colors. I don't think the color
Is that one of the stains?
It's not a stain. It's got some.
I think
It's got some dye in it. It's got some oil in it. It's got a lot of solvents in it.
Works well.
But I'm going to just do an area here. People say that it won't last, so they don't like it. Well, hell, if it don't last, put some more on it. I've never had a problem with it dulling on me, and I've used a ton of it. Don't go by the gloss of the finish. Go by the color. This isn't for gloss, this is for color. But you can see how nice and clean that's made the wood.
So I guess you differentiate it from a stain, you call it a dye, because it actually does get removed if you want to.
I would have to get on Google and find out what the definition of a stain is.
Hard to remove a stain, but...
Stains are fairly new. I think stains were developed about the same time as lacquer was coming out. Aniline dyes. And now, all your products in the wood shop are going to be water-based materials. Boy, they're nice. Like I said earlier, if this stuff was available back then, they would have used it. I'm going to take this one. This is a toner, which is clear lacquer with a dye in it. Comes two different flavors. One is opaque, and one is transparent. Transparent, the idea is that you're not going to hide the grain. Opaque gives you more color. You can't get transparent locally, it seems. I get all my transparent stuff off the internet. This is opaque, and you know because of the Ultra Classic. The other one is some other name. And this is a little pinker. This label's got some pink color to it. But this is where you color radio. It comes in all different colors.
And that takes a little bit of skill.
Yeah,
bit artistic.
You definitely want to have a bottle of wine or something to go with it.
Now, is that what the manufacturer used originally?
Yes.
That type of thing when he put the
These
black or
radios,
brown trim on it?
Almost everything was stained, toned. Because this lacquer is dry real fast, they could put a radio in a spray booth, tone it, probably within an hour, put the lacquer finish over the top of it and be on the shipping dock. If you look close on this radio, you can see it's two different colors. This is more of a blackish walnut, or this is more of a reddish walnut. And you can see where, when they toned it, they overlapped the finish. That's called shadowing. It's a trick to hide blemishes. You're looking at the end of plywood here. So that's probably why they did it this way, is to hide that edge.
And the trim on the bottom was opaque toner?
Yes, and normally that's darker than the rest of the cabinet. So after you get a finish on here where the masking tape ain't gonna do any harm, mask it off, and I normally use very dark walnut. It'll come out almost black, but in sunlight it's brown.
Is there any need to prepare that surface, the trim surface for the toner? Do you try to remove the stuff,
yeah,
sand it, or?
This has got some chips in it and stuff that'll show up. So I'd take steel wool, I'd probably take the 2 steel wool, some lacquer thinner, and since I'm going to tone it, just clean this all up. Essentially strip it, mask it off, tone it. But you can see when we pass this around that the finish is missing here. I don't know if this is going to correct it or not, but I'm going to give it a try. It's not coming out perfect. You could use a darker toner, force it a little bit more.
That's very light, what you're doing.
Yeah, you missed it out. You don't want to flood it. With the darker toners, this is perfect brown, which is pretty neutral brown. With the darker toners, You want to put some on, sit back and get into that bottle of wine, and then come back and look at it again, because it's a lot darker than you think it is when you're putting it on.
So it dries darker?
Yeah. I don't think it dries darker. I think it's just the idea that you're not noticing it.
Well, once it stops, shining, then it's going to look darker. Probably. So you keep that now out of the oak tree, or does it dry really
lacquer,
fast?
I work under a pine tree, and it's dry.
Wow, it's dry already. Good thing to do is have a clear finish on before you spray, because if you want to remove it, you don't want it to get into the wood frame if it's raw.
I see.
Otherwise,
you want it to be a top coating only.
Right, or a sealer, because then it's easy to fix it and stay.
No, I don't know. I probably got too much clear on there. I better try to take it off.
So what would you do? You'd spray on a clear lacquer first?
I'm going to wipe
I put a sealer on, because the sealer protects that underfinished wood, so that if you make a mistake, you can always strip it off and not damage the wood.
It'd be a lacquer sealer that you would put on?
Yeah, like a sanding sealer. I use a vinyl sealer on everything, because it'll take lacquer, it'll take shellac, anything, but the vinyl sealer protects that raw wood underneath, so it allows for your mistakes if you want to go back and redo it, which you'll find. Jim knows, you do a project and you wind up doing it all over again.
Yeah, Cliff and I have talked about this. Very, very seldom do we do a radio and do it exactly like we thought we were going to do it. You're constantly changing your mind, because you don't know how. These are old finishes. Have no idea how they're going to react to what you're trying to do. And I said earlier, almost everything we do here is reversible. I just tried to reverse it by taking off that hose. Mohawk. 3 things that aren't reversible.
Jim, show us what you did to the top of it. It's hard to see once you wipe that back off.
Well, hopefully it's just like it was when it was washed with soap. What I'm trying to do is get it back, this part right here, back to plain wood. I will put some stain on there.
What about where the knobs are? How does that look now?
Better.
Better? Perfect.
This is definitely a candidate for stripping.
For stripping, isn't it?
This is a nice radio, and I plan on stripping it, fixing the veneer. I wouldn't stop at this.
What did you remove it with?
Lacquer thinner.
Okay.
Since that's lacquer. But the 3 things that aren't reversible, you'll destroy a radio. One is polishing escutcheons. They aren't bright brass. Don't polish escutcheons. I've seen a lot of Zeniths ruined. And there's really no good way of redoing it. Another thing is drilling holes. Many of you guys are hams. You've probably seen all kinds of boat anchors with holes in them. Very hard to repair.
And varnishes are hard to
Third thing I
remove.
can't think of.
Varnishes take a lot of work, some of them, to remove.
Oh yeah, but they are removable.
Quasi-permanent, yeah.
Are they polyurethane?
Polyurethane?
Yeah, polyurethane, which is beautiful material. But if you have to remove it, you almost have to go with a chemical stripper, which is a chemical called methylene chloride. Quite dangerous, fumes. You know it's methylene chloride if it's burning your skin. This environmentally safe stuff is worthless. Don't waste your time. Hey, let's talk about a little bit about safety.
If you have to use a stripper through varnish, you'll probably end up all the way down to the bare wood.
Just use gloves.
That's what's going to happen.
It keeps your hands cleaner. These gloves are thin and they work great for putting on shellac, doing the soap and stuff like that, but they won't hold up at all the lacquer thinner. This is well, they're both nitro, but this is a 7 mil versus a 5 mil, but just at 2 mils, you can use this with lacquer.
There's a 9 mil you can buy too. But
You can go to Harbor Freight too and get
impregnated
These are-
cloth ones too.
These are Harbor Freight.
Harbor Freight's a good place to get stuff cheap.
No,
Yeah, they're so cheap, there's no excuse not to use it, basically. Even if it's just thin stuff and it doesn't last, fine. 100 of them for what, $5-6?
well, they're always on sale.
Yeah, they're always on sale.
If you shop at Harbor Freight, everything's on sale. These are pretty much worthless. The only thing they're good for is if you're sanding something, there's a lot of sanding dust. This will keep the boogers down.
Blowing your leaves.
But that's about all this is good for. If you're using a solvent, you need a chemical mask. I worked all my life with chemicals and I never wore protection. So smoking for 30 years probably didn't do a bit of harm to me compared to what I breathed. But definitely, if you're going to use lacquer thinner, I don't think naphtha is very dangerous. I don't know why it's outlawed. Alcohol isn't dangerous at all unless you got a low tolerance to chemicals that completely.
Naphtha's lighter fluid, right? So
Yeah.
it's pretty flammable too.
You know, at home, outside's a great place to use chemicals. You've got plenty of ventilation.
Yeah. I always use your chemicals outside because if you're in the garage, you normally got a hot water heater in your furnace in the
Oh
garage.
yeah, you got a chance
And
of combustion.
these aren't cheap though. I think this is around $50 to $70. I think these canisters are over $40 replacement.
Here's another tip. Save your old prescription. Use it when you're working with the radio because it'll protect your eyes and it's not your good pair.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the stain on this radio now and see if it'll come out any better. And I said,
Where did you say you buy those? On the
I buy it on the internet. I can't remember the internet site that I buy it from, but
It's on the internet.
Amazon has it. I just don't say. You bought a mask from Amazon.
No, I was talking about the Mohawk.
The Mohawk Toner, actually, I found a place in Concord that sells it.
Yeah, there's two places.
Buy it everywhere.
Two places in Concord. Well, one in Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill, and one in Concord. But they won't sell the transparent. They're out of most colors. They're a little bit more expensive.
So for a starter kit, what would you recommend if someone wanted to invest in, let's say, 4 or 5 of them? What colors would you?
Perfect brown.
Ebony, Cordovon, mahogany.
Well, if you're going to do mahogany, but if
Brown
you're only going to work
mahogany.
on the normal radios, normally it's walnut.
You know why, Tone? I blend them.
Yeah.
So I shoot for the color I want by using all kinds of
Yeah,
colors.
it's a hard question because, like Cliff says, you get out there with maybe 2 or 3 cans and shoot, miss some on, then miss another color on.
It's almost an eye artistic thing to blend it to where you want with multi-colors. You don't have to use just one color. You know, if you go to yeah, but there's one on North Main and Mohawk Creek. Yeah, that's the one I guess they've got a lot of.
That helped a lot for, as far as color goes, but you still got the hole in the finish that's noticeable. You could just go put some finish on top of this, either lacquer or shellac, and get rid of all that. But if you want a radio like this, you got to strip it, and that's what I'll end up doing with this. But you can see the color is good.
Yeah, the color is good.
Yeah, very nice.
Some of the dents and divots, I
It can
think, are
pass.
just character.
Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah, but it's got,
Yeah,
it's got
You
things.
don't film it, just
enough.
looks worse. It looks
If you
unnatural.
mess with them like that, one
We're
has
going
on
to have
the
that
corners like
cathedral.
that. But
Oh,
leave
back down
it
there.
alone.
Still not sure what I want to do with this, whether I want to put toner on it or Howard's. I'm going to go with Howard's since we haven't really demonstrated Howard's.
You definitely want to use Howard's outside.
Oh yeah?
It's a smell.
Well, that's why I got pneumonia too. like I said at the beginning, I'm going to jump all over the place because I'm not organized. But when it comes to Howard's, it's the greatest thing to use on Bakelite, metal boat anchors. It's just, see, we haven't got any Bakelite clean, do we? Well, we got that one down here.
Yeah, there's something on the top here. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. You've got to try it on Bakelite and metal to believe it. But how long will that finish last like that? For me, it never is a problem, but if it is a problem, put some more on.
So you can,
I think Howard's themselves say reapply after 30 days or something like that.
and then every 30 days you're supposed to do that?
I think they say once.
That'll take a while to dry.
I seldom just stop at the Howard's. I normally put the Howard's beeswax on top of it.
So you're going to do this one in Howard's, or you're going to do the beeswax after?
Do this Howard's and then put the beeswax on. This will take me a couple of minutes because if you've got something to add here.
Why don't we get a volunteer to do it while you move on?
Somebody want to get their hands dirty? I got gloves if you want to bother with the gloves. But if you keep stalling, I'm almost half done.
Just apply the Howard.
This has got oil in it, and on the boat anchors, that's what's doing the trick. There's an old trick that they used in the Navy for an inspection in the radio room. They go over all their equipment with tung oil and oil it all up. Boy, it looks great. Of course, there was all kinds of tricks to get through an inspection. Lighter fluid?
Do it on breasts. Long enough to put your fingers on it. Yeah, polish it, put the lighter fluid on it, and throw it in the locker, and it's good for the next inspection.
Yeah, Larry, he's an old Navy guy. He knows all those tricks. There's so much fun in the service. You know, you're just a lowly seaman, and normally the inspector is some lowly ensign or something like that. When you could put something over on him, that made your day. And it wasn't hard. You could have a conversation with an admiral a lot easier than you could with an ensign. Okay, pass this around. That finish is way too nice to.
Did you put the wax on it also?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Has to dry.
So this is wet now?
Some wax.
You can wipe it down.
Yeah, I tried to wipe it, but before I put the wax on, we'll go wipe it one more time. That's one of the mistakes you'll do with Howard's or even Old English is not get the excess material wiped off. And that'll become gummy.
Because it's not adhering to the sealed surface, right?
On a plastic or a Bakelite radio, or on dial scales, This is a very popular material, Novus. Comes in 3 grades. You work yourself up from the number 3 to the number 1. And it's a polishing compound. It's got pumice in it, various grades, but it's specifically designed to polish out waxes. On clear yellow dial lenses, works wonders.
Removes a layer, literally.
You can get rid of the scratches in plexiglass, not plexiglass, but whatever, lucite or whatever it was. But this is very popular material. I get this at Novus.
Tap plastics.
Tap plastics where I bought
So
this.
you're saying that'll take the yellow out of the dial cover?
Pretty much. Another way is to bleach it out. I've never done that, but
It depends on how deep that, sun damage went.
Can you spell that again? You said Novus, was it?
Novus.
Let me have one. Well, look at it.
Oh, I already got it. Okay.
This is what you use to polish out a wood finish. You might, before you get to this point, use something up to 600 grade sandpaper, wet sand it. I think that's how you do it. You left sand the hell out of it and then polish it.
If I'm using that's rotten stuff, right?
Yeah.
And, sometimes I'll wet sand all the way up to, say, 1200 grit. It makes it easier. I've done, like you say, 600 and used rotten stone, but if you really want, I've got that radio, a duplicate, only in piano finish. And I wet sanded it 1200 grit, and then used the rotten stone, and I use either 3-in-1 oil with it or motor oil, and I just hand rub it and the rotten stone in the motor oil and wipe it off, and it comes out like glass.
If you don't want to be crude, you want to be a real woodworker, use lemon oil. I use baby oil. I get it at CVS.
My father
This doesn't scratch though, 1200. This seems more coarse than 1200 paper.
Like I say, I use motor oil with it, or 3-in-1, and I use a chalk eraser. And I'll just sit there and hand do it. Within 5 minutes, it's almost, I'd refinish your baby grand piano with that, and I guarantee you won't see one hairline scratch.
This is what the woodworkers did in the old days, is rotten stone.
But
There's 3 different grades of pumice before this you can use, rather than the 1200
it's a
sandpaper.
laborious process.
Yeah.
When you're done,
If you got arthritis in your hands or something like that, you don't.
So what is the rotten stone? What is it made out of? What mineral?
Rotten stone, I'm not too sure. Pumice is volcanic ash.
It's a minute. It's a regular
I think this is plain old dirt.
Oh, so it's just a natural
I think this is dirt and pumice is volcanic
St.
ash.
Helena.
You can use baby talcum and rub, and depending on the finish, you'll get more of a satin. With motor oil, if you use a talcum and rub it, you'll get a real high gloss.
Another product that will work is toothpaste. There's just enough grit in toothpaste to do a plastic dial face or something like that. This is kind of jumping around, but for your final finish on it, if you want it to really look wet, this is what people use on cars, and it really works great on radios. Wood.
No silicone?
No. Don't know for sure what it is. I don't think it's wax, because you follow this with wax if you're doing a car. It can be done either machine or by hand when you're doing a car, but
Yep, almost all.
any idea, Larry? You're a little car guy. Have you ever done this?
We always finish with carnauba on a car. It's just carnauba is the best final
And I've read that you should never put wax over top of a lacquer finish too. If
now the products.
if you ask too many questions, you're going to get a lot of answers. If anybody tries to tell you that there's only one way to do something and it's his way, you're probably talking to a lonely old man that's trying to find a purpose in life. There's no such thing as an expert, in my book.
Like you say, Jim, you do a radio and you never do the same process twice almost. It's like you continually just refine your processes, and you do one radio one way one time, and the next time it's entirely different.
If anybody said my way is the only way to do it, you'll see it on the internet constantly. Some people are awful smart, know an awful lot, like John, but he's not an expert on anything. I don't think there's such a thing as an expert. I think there's always something to be learned in any field. You can be smarter than hell, but yeah. And I'm sure that John would agree that over the years you've probably changed your opinion on things.
We're all kids at heart, just faking it real well.
So Jim, you haven't commented much on oil finishes yet. You want to say some things?
Well, we're not going to do finishes this week, but oil is a lot of black magic. You got tongue oil, linseed oil, castor oil. You go in an old building and you'll see the handrails on the staircase or something just shiny. That's skin oil.
Human skin oil?
Yeah.
From dead people.
Oh, you see a handrail in an old building, and
Someone you don't like.
but like we talked earlier, they do polymerize. Today's oils that you buy in the store have additives to it, so they'll dry faster. If you use pure linseed oil, tongue oil, it takes forever to dry. Anything else about oil?
Well, yeah, except when you go to the store and you see oil finish, it isn't. Just remember that. It's actually kind of hard to find just plain old oil, but you can buy boiled linseed oil if you want to do it the old-fashioned way. It's even harder to get the natural tongue oil, and you don't want it raw anyway. You want it processed in some way, cooked a little bit. But the stuff in the store, when you see it, it's for the typical do-it-yourselfer, and it's probably a wiping varnish. That's probably what it is. Watco makes a product that's a blend of an oil, probably linseed oil, and a varnish. So it's kind of a in-between type of finish. It looks like an oil, but it's got some of the properties of a varnish too. But most of them are just wiping varnishes.
And you can find stains in that they react so poorly with the finishes you're going to use that you got to be careful how you use different stains with different finishes, because you could spray a lacquer over a type of stain and it'll just react and just take off, and there goes all that hours of work of stripping in that, and you're back to square one.
So I always deal with shellac if I'm using that. We haven't talked much about Larry's radio here. It's yours?
No, it's Larry.
Oh, yeah, Larry's. This is really in great shape.
It is, yeah.
I think this finish could be saved, and it may be worthwhile because it's in such good shape. I don't think this can be saved. I would mask this off, and I would either use Van Dyke Brown and put a lot on there. It'll come out looking like black, but if you've got it in the sunlight, it'll look brown. And that's where I think Mr. Majestic is wrong. Because I did 2 original Art Deco radios, Majestics, and in the sunlight it was black. And when I dissolved it with lacquer thinner, it was black. There was no brown at all to it.
Also, that grill work might be the same.
There's nothing wrong with the chrome work on this. The numbers are all nice.
You want to plate, you can destroy it with the zinc.
The biggest problem with this is this color. This is the hardest thing to deal with, is your light colors.
Like a raw umber.
They're hard to hide. The darker the finish, the easier it is to hide flaws. And the other secret is, if you want to try to hide flaws, use a duller finish. Use satin finish instead of gloss finish. You use gloss finish on anything, it's going to show every scratch, every flaw. But this is hard to match. But what I would do is try to buy some Mohawk spray toner of this color and try to get this toned.
Can you get a little stain on a Q-tip and go at the
I don't have anything that light. Everything I've got would be too dark for this.
It's kind of a honey color.
Yeah, I think maple might do it. Maple comes in different colors. Walnut comes in red, black.
Jim, you might just wet that with your finger and see if it disappears.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Try wet it with some mineral spirits and see.
Because if it disappears, then you can just use lax.
Or acetone, that'll evaporate really fast.
Repeat what he said. Repeat what he said.
He didn't listen.
Huh?
That's acetone. You don't want to put acetone on it.
Why?
That'll dissolve the finish.
Oh, because you think that's shellac.
No, what we're going to do here is just put some of this on to see what the finish really would look like, all polished up and everything. This will give you an idea if you could tone it and wax it, everything, what it's going to look like.
So either naphtha or mineral spirits could be used for that.
Anything that won't affect the.
Yeah.
I've also heard of water, and that's really what Richard said. You're right, Richard. That probably at least 50% improvement.
Yeah, you can just put lacquer on there because that'll yellow what it wants.
That's what I'm thinking. And you could put shellac on here and use the honey-colored shellac. But that finish is way too good to strip.
There may not be any tone through that.
That's another good point. You can see where it's scratched all the way down to the finish, or to the bare wood. And it may just be finish on top of the bare wood.
Yeah, that's
And you see a lot of that. I don't think they toned any finish or any cabinet unless they had to. And you'll see a lot of zeniths. That's all natural wood except for the darker trim areas that they masked off and trimmed.
Another thing I found once is if you take it all the way down to bare wood, and then as soon as you apply sandpaper, you'll go through kind of a surface patina that the old wood had that changed its color.
So what are you doing now? What's that?
So be careful if you spot sand, even after you completely strip.
It's nothing but beeswax with a lot of salt in it. It's awful easy to use. It seems to do a fairly good job, but the beauty of it is it won't turn white in crevices.
That's the last thing you do?
Yeah. Like I've said, this radio is going to get stripped. So, but if you...
Be prepared to wipe that for about a week, by the way.
Yeah, it takes forever for this to dry, but it's good stuff.
And you said it doesn't dry white in the cracks.
Right. Now you could put finish over the top, kind of like what Richard was just saying, and build this up, sand it off and everything, and clean this all up and not refinish this. It's almost questionable whether, if it was a rare radio or something like that, I'd really have a debate with myself whether I wanted to do any more to it. But this isn't rare. This isn't valuable.
When it ultimately dries, is this going to be dull finish or
no, it'll be shiny.
It will be shiny.
But you look at this radio when we pass it around, you'll see the flaking here, and that whiteness is where the finish is coming off the wood. But you take a look at that, and you look at this top, and then look at Cliff's radio. What do you want to put on the shelf?
Yeah,
that ain't the way the radio was built. That's the way the radio was built. Okay, let's wax this one. Now this one I know I've put on the shelf just the way it is because you just don't see original finishes that often. And I've changed my attitude over the years. To me, not every radio's got to look great. Some radios look good with flaws in it. And I've been trying for a long time to try to figure out how to restore radios and make it look like an old original finish. Give it patina. A lot of the radios I do, I leave the dents and scratches in and finish over the top of it, so it does look a little older. When I'm sanding the final finishes, I might sand a sharp edge or something in there and it gets lighter. I leave it that way because I think it looks like wear. In furniture, a trick they use is to go over the radio with a great big key ring of keys and just drop it on it. And that puts scratches and dents in it. That's how they do antique furniture to make it look old. You know, reproduction furniture. Take a hammer and hammer at it. But I've seen some reproduction antique furniture. Boy, it's hard to tell. A radio like this, too, when you put it in a room without the strong light on it, it's not going to show any of these flaws that much.
How long will this wax last? Forever?
Pretty much. There's no reason for it to come off. You only got a couple of molecules there. And it's really not doing anything. It's not protecting anything. Those molecules are slippery, so if you were to rub this with a dirty rag or something, you might get by with just going, because it's so slippery, not hurting it. Or without the wax, you might scratch it. But like I said earlier, I remember being told not to put wax on a lacquer finish, nitrocellulose finish on a car. You take that cathedral, imagine it with a new grill cloth, a chassis in it. That'd go on my shelf just like it is. I think the last thing I've got to say, for scratches, you can also use a touch-up pen. Mohawk sells a better selection of these than Minwax.
Is that a stain?
Yeah.
Or dye or
Yeah, I think it's stained. What I like to do, though, is I take the color toner I'm working with, spray it in a cup, and then actually paint the area with a paintbrush. And Phil Monago's got a Arvin Rhythm King that had some veneer problems, and I tried working on it and I couldn't get it to look right. So he took it to a furniture restorer, and the guy actually epoxied the stuff with Bondo and then painted in the wood. And boy, does it look nice. If you look up at it close, you're going to see it. And you see some of this automotive wood graining. I don't know, the faux, the faux correct pronunciation?
No, it's faux.
You see that faux painting on dashboards and stuff, and God.
I did a Bentley dash.
I was just going to say, Bentley and Rolls-Royce don't use real wood, do they?
No, and there's a method to it, and you can do it in about 10 minutes and charge about $10,000 for it.
We forgot to,
from our flea market. You like to deal with black
yeah, I just wanted to show you, if you don't believe me, that boat anchors can be cleaned up real easily. Most of you know that I'm a helicopters collector, so I got a lot of experience with boat anchors. This wrinkle finish is quite easy to do. You got to do one surface at a time so it's horizontal, and you really flood the paint on. You got to get it good and thick. Then you go over it with a heat gun and just play the heat gun on it.
Why do you need the heat gun?
She just won't wrinkle by itself. Some people put it in the oven, but I've been married 51 years and I ain't touching that.
I have a friend, if you get into that type of work, who does powder coating
in wrinkle,
and he can powder coat it to what that is, and it's hard as nails.
That's an epoxy.
But if you want it reproduced, because the finish is so bad, there's a lot of powder coating I use for different types of finish, even gold vein, copper vein. Some of these chassis are done in green or copper, but that's another alternate you can use if you don't want to paint or can get what you want painted.
There's another finish that they use on boat anchors called crystalline. And I have no idea how to reproduce it. I've been on the internet. What it is two dissimilar materials put on at the same time, and they're interacting with each other and lifting and causing this crystalline structure. I've got a couple of helicopters that were done in crystalline. Boy, it's a pretty finish.
One of the things you can do with the black wrinkle, like that one's not too bad, is before you give it the Howard's treatment, is just take a Sharpie, and that's permanent black ink, and go ahead and hit the the areas where it's chipped off with that first. And then don't rely so much on the Howards to bring back black where it's bare aluminum. Just use it to impart some sheen to it. And then you can buy spray cans of wrinkle paint. And you just have to develop your technique. You do have to put it on a certain thickness.
You got to do it very thick. So you got to do it horizontally, one panel at a time. And either put it in the oven at 350 degrees for 10 minutes or use a heat gun.
Well, or the heat gun is kind of hard to get uniform. What a lot of people do is they just take a big cardboard box and they put some incandescent lamps at the top.
To make your own oven, yeah.
Yeah, you just make your own oven. It doesn't have to be 350. You just want some elevated temperature. And then that will help. Even really bright sun can sometimes be enough.
You can buy heat lamps too. They're really powerful.
But first experiment on a disaster radio with that spray can first until you get it right. It's hard to do wrinkle properly, but it can be done.
I have no trouble with this duller finish on this radio, but I'll put this glaze on to see if
look the same, but
we can make it shinier.
I can do that exactly.
And some people will use a silicone spray glaze on those, and it'll look just the same as that, except don't ever try to put anything over it again, for the reasons he described. It will always be a silicone finish from that point on.
Or if you touch it up, you can use an acrylic clear on it, seal it, and then look really
The Sharpie works really well right after cleaning.
What are you applying now? That Howard you're putting on now?
No, I put that automotive glaze.
Oh, okay.
What's the brand
And
on that?
I can see right now that you would have to pop the cork on another bottle and work this a little bit more.
What's the brand on the automotive glaze?
McGuire's.
Wires?
They specialize in automotive finishes. Okay, I think there's one more thing and then there's no questions. I handed out something that says references. These are the things that I own. There's a ton of other stuff, but I can't comment on it since I don't own it. But if you're going to own one book, this is the Bible. I don't know what it is, $30, but yeah, $29.95. It's worth it. This is a video that he made that pretty much follows the book. It's kind of good to go with the book, but it's definitely not necessary. This is another expert on wood finishes. Flexner is more the expert than this guy, but hell, the guy's only about 23 years old. He don't know crap.
Old photo.
This is a good book if you want to get into French polish, but it's unnecessary because there's so much information on the internet. Just Google French polish and go to YouTube and you'll find everything you need to know.
YouTube's a great resource to just watch people.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do than to explain. And once you've done it, once you work with shellac, you'll never go without shellac. This is the Mohawk catalog. I use it quite a bit to find out what other materials there are, what colors there are. This is their color chart, completely worthless.
I personally,
even though it's free, I wouldn't bother picking it up.
no, really. I won't use this stuff.
This is great. I don't know if they still sell this. I think it was $9.95 or something, but this is great. This shows how to do a hot lacquer stick melts, whatever it is. But a lot of stuff, it's all about their products, but it all applies to antique radios. Good stuff here. This is Bellin.
They make a really good vinyl sealer. I use their product. It's a good product.
I've read where Mohawk owns them, but they're not combining the product lines. They're selling two different product lines. But I understand Mohawk owns them now. Just for historic, and that's part of the hobby to me. Here's a book published in 1910 on French polishing. And it's pretty much completely worthless except for the historic aspect of it. Gives you old formulas. One of the interesting things is it even tells you how to refinish a coffin.
I mean, after it comes out of the ground?
I don't know, I didn't say that. This is a book that Richard gave me. It was originally published 26 or something like that, 23. And then it was updated periodically over the years up into the 40s, I think. And he's got a chapter here on radio restoration. There's not much in here that I found useful, other than the historic part of it, but they're not really too clear. I think these were journalists that wrote this book and not woodworkers. I just didn't think there was that much in it. If you really want to get into it, there's this set of DVDs. There's two 3-hour DVDs per box, 6 hours per box, 6 boxes. So that's 36 hours of refinishing antique furniture. Costs $100 for this. Richard, you bought your set, didn't you? It's only if you really want to get into the stuff deep. It's mostly about furniture, but mostly applies to wood. But you learn a lot about hide glue. He's got just a lot of tricks that are useful, but it's $100. Okay, now I think, let's see, that's some stuff. Sleeping was permitted, but not for you. Have you got anything you want before we?
No, you know, I mean, I think restoration is based on what you want to do for yourself, you know, I mean, or what the value is of whatever you're restoring. You know, you always see like Antique Roadshow where someone restored something so it lost 50,000 off of something and it's only worth 10, but I don't know who sets the rules for what's, you know, valuable and what it is restored. You know, I mean, they talk about cars now with barn finds that they want the old paint and all that. Well, I don't want a rusty piece of junk in my garage. I want this thing to look like it did when it came out of the factory, and it's up to you what you want to accomplish, you know, how much work you want to put into it. So like that radio there, I bought it for $45 and it was painted black. I sold the sister to that one that I redid that was just as bad. I sold the sister to that one for almost $1,000 on eBay. So you tell me, barn find or restore, it changes what people think you should do or shouldn't do for restoration. I go through the chassis, the electronics, I do the inside of the cabinets, I do the speakers. It looks like it's off the assembly line when I'm done, but that's my preference. So it just depends on what you want. So If you could go original, it'd be great, and you know, it's just what you want. And for me, a lot of my stuff is just immaculate, but I want to show it as it was brand new. But like I say, it just becomes, if you're going to devalue something, and that's in the collector's market.
Okay, our next class is going to be the 25th of this month, which is also our